In this 30-year survey, we see Graham delving into the Irish experience and deeply mining his own personal experience. One has to understand that when Graham emerged onto the art scene, there was no context for this sort of contemporary art in Ireland. The story begins early on in childhood. Born in 1943, Patrick was a prodigy. He had a natural penchant for drawing. There was no artistic context in Ireland. Art was utilitarian at best, signage, theatre backdrops, but the art world of Ireland was really a scene that emulated European and English painting. Patrick was winning prizes as a child as people were submitting his drawings to competitions unbeknownst to him. At 13 years old, he won a full scholarship to the Royal College of Ireland. Of course, he couldn't go because he was too young to accept, but indeed, at the age of 16 years old, was the youngest person to be admitted for full scholarship to the Royal College. At college, Patrick had a following, which included all of his professors. In this world of academic art, there was not yet the notion of the reasons for making art as a personal expression. Personalistic art was just not part of the dialogue, as art really merely emulated European and English painting. Graham felt tremendous burdens of all this adulation of what he later came to call his unearned gift. And then upon seeing a small exhibition of the works of Émile Nolden, these dark watercolors in the small museum show in Ireland, cut Graham in half. They were against everything he was taught. They were absolutely an offense to him and everything he had learned. And yet somehow, privately, he knew that there was truth in those works, and what he was experiencing, his own art, was mere facility of hand. And Graham started to battle with himself and the notions of art and its possibilities which had never been taught to him, and the burden of adulation and the falseness of his talent drew him into a very, very dark place. He fell into depths few ever emerge from, even to the waking to a priest reading last rites. There was a physical and metaphysical transformation as Graham suddenly came out of this deep depression and escaped from his reality. And there was one last time that was life-changing and art-changing for the history of Irish art. Graham was in hospital and once was sitting at a table, and there was another patient at that table. And Graham, after thinking he hadn't drawn in some years, picked up a pencil and a pad and started to draw a perfect portrait of this patient that they called the collector. Collector would be, you know, assembling string and twigs and what have you. And Patrick drew an absolute perfect likeness of the fellow. And in doing so, you know, the ego started to evolve, and Paddy's thinking, well, I still got it, and so forth. And then, in a very important moment, took that drawing and placed it in front of that patient's face. And he saw it and had absolutely no reaction. And Graham then started to seethe about it and think, why should he react? I've given him a perfect mirror. This is an empty facility. There's no truth in it. There was no moment of revelation at all. A man sees himself in a mirror every day. And Patrick at that point started to work into that drawing, expressively, tearing it through with expressive lines and emotion. And there are those in Ireland that will tell you that that was the moment that the notion of free expression in art was born. An exhibition soon followed called Notes from Mental Hospitals and Other Love Stories. And it was a shocking experience for the critics and artists. Many were completely offended by the work, but there were those progressives who understood that here was something extraordinary. And Graham established a sense and direction that was profound. While most of the works from that period have since been destroyed, this exhibition begins with the works of the early 1980s, where we see this new expression, very autobiographical, very referential to art, literature, poetry, history, and we see Graham mining the Irish turf in bringing poetry to the fore. The palette is dark, as is Irish soil. Turf in Ireland has a magic quality. It's a component from which legend and mythology and magic emerge. The earth was an extraordinary connection in Ireland, and Graham's earliest paintings and drawings come from this dark, but from it emerge hope and color, and is very deceptive because one sees these beautiful layers of colors. What distinguishes Graham's work is also the autobiographical context and how he merges personal experience with cultural experience. In this work, a very personal work indeed, coming out of these dark places, Graham is reflecting here on the birth of his new son, Robin, a kind of second chance. Graham was a product, actually, of a tragically Irish cliche at the time in post-war Ireland, where the father goes to England to find work without returning, mother becomes ill, etc., etc. And out of this dark place that Graham comes, there's this birth of a remarkable young baby. You also see here reference to other aspects of culture. The tin drum, Günter Grass's famous book. As you can see, for example, in this painting, the palette deals with that earthly quality of Ireland. It's a very suggestive painting where Graham utilizes text a great deal. Words are a very big part of the Irish culture, and words were placed in these paintings, not always for our own references, but a sort of hook to hang his own hat on. They're referential, but always somewhat obtuse. Here we see a work that is kind of dangerous in a way, but speaks to a seduction, a romance, an escape in the night. It's a subject that was completely taboo in the Irish society. Sex was absolutely not part of the dialogue. In fact, there was an exhibition, very early on, one of his first exhibitions, where Patrick's works were reproduced in the newspaper, and Patrick and his mother were at the exhibition, and in the background there was a beautiful nude work. His mother was so shocked that in this conservative place in Mullingar in the Midlands of Ireland, she, with little ability to afford it, went throughout the town buying all of those newspapers to destroy. This is how provocative works that we would deem to be very natural and common, they took on historic proportions in Ireland and were shocking. In this work, again, a very personal expression, a song for T&R, Thelma and Robin to be. Patrick's early facility of remarkable draftsmanship and drawing was the thing that he needed to throw away to create art. And in this work, though, we see just a hint of the extraordinary facility of these two, the self-portrait, Thelma, almost in photographic realism, and yet they're created with a hit of a brush in a way that is suggested of every nuance in a portrait if it were photorealist. While sexuality wasn't often dealt with in Ireland's art world and general social milieu, in this work, The Lark in the Morning, Graham creates a truly poignant work. We see reference to a song, a very common song, The Lark in the Morning, and written at the top, the lark in the morning, she rises off her nest and comes home in the evening with dew upon her breast. The reference in Graham's case is this passage of womanhood, this journey, and all of Graham's work deals with this existential journey. Shrouds, veils, swaddling cloths, the fabric has been a part of that transition from beginning to end. And here we see the veil seen throughout the painting, the shroud. In this case, we see interior and exterior as well in the creation of the work. In the far left area, we see this beautiful kind of unfolding, in almost as a crucifixion, of this vaginal form that speaks to a woman emerging into womanhood, and the critical point of a pearl at the top. In this, the earliest painting in the exhibition from 1983, entitled The Artist, the Woman, Patrick creates an homage to David Bomberg, a well-known English painter who symbolized the struggle of an artist that early on had little recognition. Through the support of his wife, his model, and his own perseverance, he's essentially survived and created a body of work that has since been greatly recognized and served as an inspiration to Patrick, who in his own life had that same early support, which took him from points of great difficulty to creating this remarkable body of work. While deeply rooted in the Irish experience, Graham's works transcend cultural and national boundaries in extraordinary ways. His exhibitions in Los Angeles and the rest of the country and beyond have had a formidable impact upon so many artists, collectors, and critics. A quote by the celebrated critic Donald Cuspit, I think, sums up the entire body of work. He stated, Patrick Graham's paintings are masterpieces on a grand physical, emotional, and intellectual scale. They are among the most complicated and salient reflections on modern existence that have been made. In this work, Somewhere Jerusalem, that aspect of hope is so clearly demonstrated. As we all search for our own personal Jerusalem, be it artistic, emotional, national, religious, in this work, Graham has done something quite extraordinary. He has created a book, in a sense. It opens up, there's a binding, and the innocence of it, suggested by the small silk flowers at the top. We see references that we see throughout the work, references to the hill, the incredible sort of Asian landscape that's suggested in ostensibly just abstract strokes. Graham utilizes in his works a kind of Chinese perspective. He's certainly understanding of Renaissance perspective to create depth, but suddenly you stand in front of a painting of Patrick Graham's and it will open up as though a hand came behind you and pulled you into the work. In terms of finding the innocence and the desire for simplicity, Graham creates in this work, I think, one of the most amazing and complex statements in the body of work. The Captain's Hill was a place that he found solace as a young boy, climbing a hill and retreating into the privacy of his own thoughts. The reference to the swan deals with the magic of Ireland, and there are many legends that deal with birds, and particularly the swan, and they actually have their origins in this region where Patrick was born and raised, in Mullingar. It's a complex work, and it's a poignant work that speaks to so many aspects. We see references at the top to the Swan series, to Somewhere Jerusalem, which is a reference that we will address in other works, to A Dead Swan, Mullingar, Graham, 1979, Pieta, something holy. And what we see are these lines, these phrases, which serve as prayers in holy shrines that people actually would leave for a good harvest, for an illness in the family, for a debt owed to another, for a good exam result, for a daughter away, for the repose of the soul of, for the gift of a son, and for the favor received. We see these childlike planes dropping bombs, and we see the Star of David dropping here. The reference to Somewhere Jerusalem speaks to the search for possibilities. And so we see in this work what I think is clearly one of the most amazing and complex subjects reduced to pure essence. We see as the work progresses, as in this work from 2001, particularly in the drawings, Graham distills the subject to pure essence. In this remarkably poignant series entitled Seeing Ingres, the great 19th century artist Ingres, we see his beautiful odalisque. And from this odalisque series, Graham does something that is an underpinning to the entire body of work. It questions the great truths, that there are no great truths, only very small ones, and they keep changing. If a woman was as fortunate, perhaps, to look like Ingres' gorgeous female nude for a very short time in her life, That's a passing element in her life. So does that mean it's the end of beauty? So Graham approaches the question of, is beauty so ephemeral? Is there no more beauty after that very brief span in one's life? The question arose, really, when a loved one was terminally ill. And in a moment when there was very few months ahead of her in her life, after going through treatments and so forth, and her alteration of her appearance, she looks at her husband, and Graham was there at the time, and she said to her husband, "Have I lost my beauty?" So this notion of beauty as a powerful element in our lives became part of a series of this existential journey that Graham has continued from beginning to his final works as they are today. The Odalisque series is populated by figures, in this case on a gurney, and Graham himself serves as this kind of childlike angel with a shroud again, with a veil. We see elements which will appear again and again in the work later on, and we see these rather benevolent little monsters, more like what might populate a children's book. And one of the important aspects of Graham is this desire for innocence and simplicity, moving away from this kind of Renaissance fastidiousness, but to bring it back to innocence and the beginning. In Patrick's distillation of his drawings of the subjects of these works, he has created something quite extraordinary, where the spaces between were as important as the marks themselves. There's something very poetic about smudges, tears, what seem like incidental marks take on a kind of orchestration, and it's clearly understandable why so many have equated his works not only with the force of an Anselm Kiefer, but the poetic mark-making of the best of Cy Twombly. These smudges and tears and marks suddenly and unexpectedly reveal figures, landscapes, objects, and the poetic nature of these works are just so profound. In this masterpiece from 2006 entitled Wreath, Graham uses that element, the wreath, as both memorial and celebration. Indeed, he makes reference at the top of the painting for HB, a reference to an artist he so greatly admired, Hans Burkhardt, who equally admired Patrick Graham. It's also an extraordinary landscape that opens up in this incredible space, and with the hill and the slash marks that make as much of a reference to standing stones as personage, people populating the canvas. It's a remarkable work, both for its simplicity and complexity, and I think stands as one of the great paintings in the body of work.